Good morning. This is Lynn Robinson from Easterseals Colorado, and I'm welcoming you to a webinar called A Toolkit for Developing College Courses at Camp. If you're having any problems hearing me, please go into the chat portion of the screen, and you can send us a note, and we can see if we can raise the volume. As I said, I'm Lynn Robinson. I work at Easterseals Colorado. I've been here for about 17 years, and over the course of the time, I've seen some amazing things at our camp. One of the things I've been most impressed by is how much our counselors learn and develop while they're at camp. So it became a natural to try and figure out a way for these young folks, which typically are college-bound or in college, or planning to work in healthcare or related fields, to get some credit for their work. So we're going to proceed through these screens, and as I said, if you have any questions as we go along, you can either raise your hand and we'll unmute you, or type your question into the screen and we'll try and answer it as in the context of what we're talking about. The overall, what we're going to talk about is the why, the how, the what, the who, and the when that we developed this course, and how you can do this at your own setting. It was actually a project that we started about 5 years ago in concert with Dr. Tracy Kovac, who will be speaking. And Tracy has been a long-time supporter and worker at Easterseals. She's worked with us for about 19 years, but about 5 years ago she helped us develop this course. She is a very experienced speech pathologist and consultant to us and many other agencies in our area. As I was saying, I realized very early on how much these camp counselors had to learn in order to take on the job of camp counselor. So I became a natural asking why couldn't they get credit for their work and capitalize on that learning. So, and I'm not going to read every single slide. I have a few things to add in each area. So you can see pretty much most of my comments. I'll summarize some of those. Most of the folks who take this for college credit are enrolled or planning to enroll, and we'll use this as an elective. The colleges, we have a college that we work with, although many of the colleges across the country, if the student talks to them early enough, can get college credit within their own home school. Otherwise, they can just transfer credits to their university. Over the course of the summer, which is 11 weeks, these folks do everything from learning about personal care, first aid, transferring, risk management, communication with parents, children, staff, HIPAA requirements, universal health precautions. They do this in a classroom setting, and then they actually have experiential work doing all of this hands-on. The why is probably one of the for me was one of the most important parts. Again, it was allowing these students to formally document exactly what they were doing and to show this either to, obviously, a college program or to use it with a future employer. It also formalizes what they're learning, made them much more aware of how much they were learning, and in the end, we got great outcomes from these individuals who took the class. We also use this as a great recruitment tool. Many of the college counselors that came to us were very enticed by the idea of being able to get credit for the work they were going to be doing anyway. So that was a wonderful tool. Plus, as for those who are unsure if they're going on to college, this gave them a formalized program that they could show to a future employer, and it was a win-win for us at the camp as well as the college for the individual going on to college or to employment, and of course for our camp participants. As I alluded to earlier, the program gives a great deal of credibility because there's a formalized curriculum, but it is actually what all of our camp counselors are doing anyway, but allows that to be formalized and also lets them take a piece of paper that has all this information, including the college credit, whether they use it for a college course or not. But it gives them in a formalized way the credibility that they need to show to, as I said, a college or an employer. They can use this if they're going into nursing, psychology, education, social work, PT, OT, speech therapy, and I think most importantly, it gives all of these college, or I shouldn't just say college, all these individuals who work as counselors the ability to say they've worked with multiple populations and lots of employment opportunities.
Yeah. Hi, this is Tracy. It's a pleasure to be here, and it's been more of a pleasure to work with Easterseals over the years and to work with the camp program. As Lynn mentioned earlier, recruitment is a big portion of what counselors are looking at in terms of where they're going to be and where they're going to spend their time for the summer. So using the fact that this particular college has, or this particular camp offers college credit is sometimes just that little bit of an edge that might say, oh, I think I'm going to go to Colorado because I can get college credit for what I'm doing over the summer. So it may attract counselors to the program that are in programs, as Lynn mentioned, but it also provides a level of competence for some of the other counselors that may not be at that level in terms of mentorship opportunities. And so, as Lynn mentioned, it's really a win-win for both the counselors, the camp program, and certainly for the students who may be interested in it. It gives, as Lynn mentioned, additional credibility to the program. It tells people that this camp is really in the business and is really serious about training people in this area for their experience. So how is this done? Part of the dilemma that we all experience is, yeah, great idea, Lynn, wow, terrific. So how the heck do we get it done? So answering that question is different in different areas, but I'm going to just give you a little bit of information about how Easterseals Colorado went about it. Because offering college credit as part of your Easterseals camp program is probably not something that is what all the Easterseals camps are all about. The first thing that I think is important to identify is the institution. College credit has to be accredited, or coursework has to be accredited by an organization. And if you really want it to amount to anything in terms of transferable, it needs to be from an accredited college or university. So as Lynn mentioned, we've worked with various different institutions. The one that we're working with right now is Adams State University. And the important part about finding an institution is just to really explore what options there may be out there for establishing these college credits. Oftentimes, universities have what they call independent studies or extended studies programs. And so that's a good way to get into a college or university without having to make changes in curriculum, which is very difficult. Usually curriculum programs already have all their coursework established, and so it's really difficult to add more courses. Also, when you're looking at institutions, it allows you to establish a relationship, perhaps with some faculty in that area. So does the institution provide extended studies or continuing education programs? And if so, are other organizations perhaps in your area or state utilizing them? We came in contact with Adams State University because a number of organizations within the state, school districts in particular, were offering college credit to their employees for participating in their continuing education training. And when you're in a program that you need to have college credit for continuing education work, that's a huge advantage, as it can be for our camp folks as well. I'm going to mention this, and maybe Lynn will talk a little bit more about it, but I can say from my perspective as the instructor of record for these courses, camp support is really essential. And it's essential because it starts at the very, very beginning in terms of informing and hiring counselors who may be potential students, and also being there to accept the responsibilities that may come along, since I'm not going to be at camp 24/7 this summer. And so I think having the camp staff supporting it is really critical.
Yes, and what I'll add to that is that because the camp staff is there all the time and always supervising, they're the ones that the counselors go to with their questions. And I think because, as I said, the camp staff is setting up, running, getting everything together for the program, sometimes they get a bit overwhelmed with adding one more task, which is this college course. So it's taken us a few years, but I believe it's somewhat more embedded in the minds of those that we work with. We've been very fortunate to have a very stable staff, so I think they've bought into it. But it didn't happen automatically. It did take a few years before I think they too saw this as a benefit.
And I think one of the reasons they saw it as a benefit was because they got very positive feedback from the counselors who were taking the course credit, and they saw a benefit in terms of their participation. In fact, just last evening I was up at camp registering the students for this summer's working camp. One student is short 1 credit hour from graduation, and she was able to get these courses approved for her to graduate. So without this, she would have had to enroll for an additional semester's worth of work and probably wouldn't have been able to graduate. So answering that question, what's the content of the course or courses, and what are the requirements in terms of participating and offering the course? I can just tell you that each institution, each college will have their own specific requirements, their own templates or forms that you have to fill out. So that's something that you're just going to need to look at. But a few general sorts of things that you need to think about is the qualifications of what is called the instructor of record, and that means that that person has to have a curriculum vitae that makes sense to the college or university to be that instructor. Specific contact hours for instruction are always needed, and so you have to say, okay, counselors, we know you're doing this all the time, but according to our records, the course says from 8 to 9, you're really going to focus on this component of what you're doing. So it's important to make those contact hours work within the context of what the counselors are already doing. There's also always additional time that the students are going to be required to refine their learning. It's not just like sitting in class for 5 hours and that's it. It's like for every hour of credit you get, there's an additional 15 hours of off the class time learning. That's not a problem for our counselors. You have to come up with a course description, and that course description has to tell you exactly what you're going to do. You have to identify the student learning outcomes, specifically what you want the students to learn, not just have a good time and do a good job, but really what's really specific to your content and what they're going to learn. You oftentimes have textbooks that are required or optional. We do have some resources up at camp for people, all counselors who are interested in learning a little bit more about a certain disability. They can look into a textbook and get that information. There might be additional readings that are required or that you make available for students as well. And again, the course requirements. What does it take to pass this course? Do I have to get an A on this or that or the other? How are you going to grade the students? What's the grading scale? All of those things are important. So Easterseals Colorado courses are offered through excuse me, I'm going to get some water, through the extended or continuing education programs. Usually for those programs, in-state and out-of-state tuition fees are exactly the same, and they're very, very low, and there are no prerequisites that are required, which fits into the makeup of our counselors. For our 1-hour college credit course, this is the training that Lynn was talking about earlier that really involves the learning that the counselors have to do in terms of care for individuals with disabilities, policies related to this care, any additional information, that's needed in terms of completion of activities, reading materials that might be necessary or that might help in terms of accomplishing some of the objectives that everybody's going to have in terms of addressing the needs of the campers at the camp. So at the end of the week, all the counselors for this particular course are going to take a test. And we made this test sort of like not optional for just the students who are enrolled in the coursework, but for everybody, because really what it does is it informs the camp staff about how well certain topics were covered and what they might need to supplement as time goes on, as well as what they may want to change in terms of their training. So that's one one-hour course that's offered prior to the campers attending the camps. The other course that's offered is a 3-hour course, or what we call a practicum, and it provides opportunities to learn while you're doing and demonstrate the skills while you're working with the campers at the camp. As Lynn mentioned, Easterseals Colorado camp has 11 weeks. Each week has a different group of campers that come, and so for each week the counselors are learning about a new group of campers and what they need to learn about those campers to make that experience the very best that can be had for the campers. Students' contact hours, the instruction outcomes, all the stuff that I talked about earlier are defined. And what the students have to do in terms of demonstrating their skills also has to be defined. We ask for feedback related to the development and performance in their weekly skills, and this is really to help the camp staff understand how are these counselors doing. Sometimes, you know, they're getting feedback all the time. They're supervising these counselors all the time anyway, but sometimes making a little bit more formal helps the staff really focus on what needs to be done. And again, this is time consuming. This is something that happens all the time. It's not just when the instructor is up at camp that you observe these kinds of skills. So the next question to answer is who. So who is that instructor going to be? And not only who the instructor is going to be, but who pays the instructor? Who pays for the course registration, tuition, and fees? Who pays for the cost of materials if there are any other costs that might be incurred? I can tell you that oftentimes the instructor of record is one that is already affiliated with the college or university. It may be someone who has a PhD or master's degree, and even sometimes not even that level of accomplishment in terms of degrees, but rather what their experience is and how competent the university feels they may be as an instructor who's supposedly instructing individuals about a certain area. One who can identify with other qualified or related instructors could be an instructor. And then, of course, there are always those additional people as part of the instruction program, which are the camp and program staff leaders. So who pays for what? That's essential to success, and you have to figure that out in advance. The course tuition and fees are generally, through the continuing education or extended studies program, as I've mentioned, significantly less expensive than they would be if you were enrolled at that university. If you're enrolled in a university, you have to pay all kinds of fees related to your enrollment and all that sort of thing. And so that's why universities can afford to make the extended studies courses less expensive. But if you're going to have someone, unless they're willing to just donate their time as the instructor, you have to figure out how they're going to get paid. Oftentimes, extended studies programs do not pay themselves, the instructor. It's the sponsoring agency that pays the instructor. And so that's something that you need to evaluate and determine what needs to happen and how you're going to do that. Sometimes, of course, universities require unpaid time by the counselors in terms of the actual course contact time. And so you're going to have to work out how you can manage that with your counselors. Are they willing to have a salary deduction for the time that they're engaged in the course? And then you also want to consider having scholarships for the students so that you can leverage what you might be wanting to do in terms of the scholarship reimbursement to the students.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that scholarship issue is in our case, we were able to work with the university, and the university charges us approximately $220 for the 4 units. The way we do this with our counselors is say to them, over the course of the summer, a small portion of their paycheck is deducted each month to pay up to the $220. And upon completion, successful completion of the course, we give them that money back. This allows them to have some buy-in, but also they realize without too much effort, they're going to be able to get 4 units of credit basically free, and I should say free. The cost is their time and their effort, but obviously they wouldn't get it under any other circumstance. So the way we have gotten this money is through some grants, and there are lots of grants out there that are encouraging and helping agencies like ours pay for individuals who want to go into healthcare or some related field. And so this is a very, I shouldn't say easy, but it's easier than you realize in terms of getting some funding for that area. The issue of when to start this, if you decide this is something for you to be doing, you might even survey your counselors this summer and say, is this something you would have been interested in had we been able to offer it? But really, as soon as your camp session is over, you need to make contact with the universities and a qualified instructor in your area, because it takes a while. The universities move very slowly. They also tend to be doing things during summer that are not as structured, so you have to catch these people as they're available. So to start as early as possible is really helpful. And then with your staff, you determine the cost, identify your course objectives, as we talked about, and obviously a clear issue is having a great instructor. In our case, because Tracy had affiliations with several institutions, it was much easier, and her doctorate also brought some credibility that I think we wouldn't have had in another case. And coming up quickly, which Tracy was able to do with some help from camp staff, is what was the course? What is it going to look like? What are these individuals required to do, and what are the outcomes that they will see as they complete this course?
Yeah, so as Lynn mentioned, it's never too early to start, and it's helpful to have the course approved and listed in the university's college course catalog by the fall semester prior to the summer in which you're offering it. So as she said, it's summer now. Now is the time to sort of get some feedback from the students or from the counselors that are at camp to see whether or not this would be something they were interested in. And we actually did that a few years ago. We asked the counselors, would it be helpful for you if you could take college credit? And even if you had to pay for it, would it be something that you would be interested in? And majority of the counselors who were interested in continuing their education were very much interested in that. So it's time to think about recruiting the students that are already, if you're able to get the course registered or listed in the college university catalog, you can help, that helps you recruit students that are already in maybe disability-related programs who might be interested in taking the summer to really have some hands-on. It's one thing to say that you're signing up to be a speech-language pathologist, but you've never seen anybody who has a speech-language need. So utilizing the summertime when you may not be involved in your regular program curriculum to get that experience is a huge advantage. So you can establish also the camp staff who will be able to provide information, and it will allow ample time to develop all the necessary training activities and materials that you need.
And I would just add onto that slide is really most of us who run camps already have a curriculum. It's just formalizing that curriculum and coming up with very measurable outcomes that we can show to an educational institution. That being one, it's much easier, I think, than you realize. And also using the summertime to get college, either whether it's deans or professors or individuals of the various departments, to come up to camp and see this amazing environment where all these counselors are really learning not only specific skills, but how to relate to people with very, very different needs in multiple situations, and what I would say real life situations. It's not a classroom or a clinical experience. It's the things that our campers experience every single day. So in closing, I think that you can see that how we saw this as a vision to help define and better craft the skills that our counselors were learning, so that they would have better ways of communicating with the people that they wanted to serve, and also when they're working with families and caregivers, and to recognize the value of offering a college credit for camp counselors' experience was really important. And I think overall the thing that we don't really state in here but is clear is by starting this in the beginning of summer, we set up sort of a continuum where counselors are much more aware of their environment. There's a lot more critical thinking. And their final project for us was one of the most amazing experiences because they were asked to look at a problem, a barrier, or some situation that prevented a camper from participating fully. And in several cases, they came up with some amazing solutions. Some were relatively simple and some were more complicated, but things that we as a camp could put into practice. There was some issues around those folks with autism, for example, that needed a different kind of environment versus where we have our breakfast, lunch, and dinner is a very noisy, very busy area, and coming up with a quiet area not only during meal times but for other moments when these folks were unable to handle all the sensory input, and it was actually a pretty easy solution, something we could do. There was also another counselor who came up with a better and safer way to help us get campers with head and neck injuries onto a horse to prevent further injury of them, obviously, but also to prevent injuries for the counselor. So there was a lot of great solutions that came up that we could implement. And so as I think this has turned out for all of us, it's a win for the camper, a win for the counselor, and a win for the camp. So,
and something that I think that was very impressive is that board members of Easterseals were able to listen to these presentations. You know, I think for a lot of us, we can say, oh, well, yeah, kind of, it makes sense to have a quiet area at camp. Yeah, that makes sense. But when you actually are up there, when you see what goes on, and when you hear counselors talk about their camper and what the barrier was for their camper's participation and how they would very specifically resolve that problem, make changes, it's different than just us sitting around talking about it. It really puts into play more sort of experiential learning for board members as well. So their buy-in, I think, was pretty important.
We thank you so much for attending today. If you have any questions, and I don't know if there's anybody with their hand up or there's any questions that we've left unanswered. If you have any questions that were unanswered, were there any? You can contact any one of the three of us, although I will honestly say Megan Cluth is probably the most effective in getting back to everybody and responding. She has all the details of our programs and can share them with you. I think we have one. Do we have one question here? Okay, I think we don't. So
we've ended a little early. We could keep talking.
We don't need. It's always nice to give you some extra time to go on and do other things. Thank you for spending the time with us and taking the time. And if you ever have a chance and you're in Colorado, please come visit our camp, Rocky Mountain Village. We'd love to show you what we do and share with you the experience and the magic of our camp.